Hello, thank you for that introduction, and it's so wonderful to be with you here today, although I'm in the Gold Coast and you're in Melbourne. It's amazing the timing. I'm about to do the World Championship Saturday, 15th September. This event happens every year, and it's the best triathletes from all around the world, so it's always a relief to get to that start line. But firstly, I'd like to just say congratulations to Emily and David Shepherd for all the work that you've done in the Usher Syndrome movement. In the short space of time since you've launched UsherKids Australia, I've seen it online, and an increasing level of conversation about Usher Syndrome, what it means, and really trying to lobby to get more funding for research and to increase awareness. So I'm here today to, share my story, how I came to learn that I had Usher Syndrome and what it's meant for me, how it's impacted my life, and touch a little bit on my journey as a paratriathlete. So I'm talking through some slides here, and you might be able to see them there. I'll talk about growing up, what that meant, why I was never a good usher. I'll give you a bit of perspective on that, the road to Rio, the real impact of gold, and where I can help. So growing up, I was brought up in a country town in New South Wales in the 80s, and a lot of you might be recall the 80s, depending where you're at, but that was really a time when there wasn't so much support for, children with special needs. When I found out at the age of 5 that I had a hearing loss, the hearing test was literally a doctor clapping in my ear, old Dr. Burford, and he said to Mum, no, her hearing's fine. And it wasn't until I went to primary school that my kindergarten picked up on it. So from 0 to about the age of 5 or 6, I had no hearing aids. So you can imagine my speech development was quite delayed. And I had the option to go to a special school in Lismore, which was some 30 minutes from where I was living in Casino. And I was very steadfast with my mum and dad that no, I wanted to stay at St Michael's with my friends. So I'm very thankful that I had an integrated education. It would have been quite challenging if it was different. So as a child, and like we all know what children don't want to be different, they want to feel they belong with their friends, and I didn't want to be treated any differently. And it was little things like they had the speech therapist used to come to my school, and I used to hide, and they'd come looking for me. So eventually they changed that where I would go to the speech therapist. So you can imagine those first couple of years I had quite a bit of speech therapy work and so on. And even then the audiologist was Lismore or Brisbane, the old National Acoustic Laboratory. So I used to travel to get my regular hearing tests and so on done. And then progressed through school, and I actually went away to a boarding school, which was really great for my education. I used to use the old FM system where I'd wear a walkie-talkie type thing and the teacher would wear one, and that would enable me to hear. And that was in my teenage years. And I think too, at that point, once the novelty wore off, I didn't really want to wear it again, just didn't want to be different to everybody else. But certainly having a hearing loss, a lot of frustration, and it's that sense of always having to really, more effort to listen to what's happening and struggling in group conversations. And also for me was really, I felt I had to work harder than my peers to really catch up with school. And I think by the time I got to year 11 and 12, I felt like I was at where I needed to be. So after that, I've always loved sports. It's a place I've always felt very comfortable playing on the field. And so it wasn't a coincidence that I pursued a sports marketing career and went to Griffith University and studied sports management. And even there at Griffith, the universities are fantastic in terms of support for people that have different sort of needs. And I had a note taker who would take my notes, which was just a fantastic help. And this was obviously the days before video and podcast, and we actually had handwritten notes. So that was a huge help for me. About that time, I was at Griffith Uni, living in Brisbane, and I was working at the Queensland Performing Arts Complex, part-time job. eventually I would move to Sydney, and my first job out of uni was with Super League, which was the rebel competition by Rupert Murdoch in competition with the ARLs. So here I was at age 21 in my dream job, living in Sydney. I was being flown to Brisbane, to Canberra for the Super League competition and having a ball. And I think too, for me, I really had a sense of myself. I'd overcome my insecurities with the hearing loss, and I really felt at one with my peers and felt that I had, my capacity was as equal as everyone else. And I'll just touch on that. In terms of my professional life, I've worked at the NRL, at Melbourne Storm, ANZ Stadium, government department in the NT. And just for a personal experience, I would never disclose that I had a hearing loss in an interview. And primarily I just didn't want to be treated differently, and I wanted to be judged on merits. And in some ways that probably didn't work to my favour. There were obviously some of my employees and managers were fantastic, and they said to me, I wish you'd let me know sooner because we could have made it a bit easier for you. So I think a key to that is ensuring that employers and companies create an environment where people feel comfortable to disclose whatever challenges they might have. And there is that communication that comes through in the application process that we are judging you on your merits. It's really about your capacity and your experience. And likewise, once you are employed, to have that conversation and say, hey, is there anything that we can do to help? So, I remember one interview, and I was being interviewed by an Irish guy, so I couldn't understand his accent. And my hearing aids went flat during the interview and I couldn't hear him. And somehow I managed to navigate my way through this interview and I got the job. So it's amazing, I think, how adaptable we are. And, I think some of you have children with hearing loss. You'll see how they cope and the mechanisms they use to get around. So I went to, obviously, my sport marketing career got underway. I've always been very active and done marathons and half marathons and triathlons and so on. And it was about the age of 23 that I saw an ophthalmologist. I'd been referred by the optometrist. And the short of the story is he did all the eye tests and he said, Katie, the reason for your hearing loss is you've got Regman pigmentosus, tunnel vision, and you've got a condition, I believe, which is Usher Syndrome. It's a deaf-blind condition. So my first reaction was just, I guess, a little bit of, not anger, but just frustration. I think that's the word. Coping with the hearing loss, and I'm thinking, and now you're going to take my eyesight, But also I think in many ways, having my hearing loss and the challenges and having to adapt and modify and so on held me in good stead to cope with losing my eyesight. So it was almost, for me, it was a challenge, and I just thought, well, that's the way it is, and I'll do what I need to do. But coming back to, I was working at the Queensland Performing Arts Complex and I was an usher. So this is where I was at uni, and I used to have people that would come in, for the Australian Ballet, the Lion King, and they would come in after the lights had gone down, and so you'd have to usher them to the seat with a torch. And I would always struggle, and I never knew why. I struggled to get them, and I'd use the torch for myself. So when I found out I had Usher syndrome and I heard the word usher for the first time, I thought, that explains why I was never a good usher. I was bloody hopeless. So I knew that when I found out I had Usher syndrome, a lot of things made sense. So I remember as a kid, I never really liked, we have late night barbecues in the 80s that went all weekend, and I never really liked staying out in dark and playing hide and seek and that sort of thing. I wasn't a big fan of camping, school camps, and it was just subtle things, and to me that just made sense. And I always struggled with my balance. I was terrible at things like ballet and that compared to everybody else. So getting that diagnosis, it made sense. And I guess my attitude was time is of the essence. And I then went on to Melbourne to work for Melbourne Storm and had 2 fantastic years down in Melbourne. So about that time, I've got a slide there about Usher syndrome, but you all know what this is about. And this slide for your reference, this presentation is similar to what I use for all my presentations to educate people about Usher syndrome, what it is. And I've got a slide here that gives people a sense of what I can see through my eyes. That image is a little bit dramatic. My vision is about 10%, so it's a little bit more broad than that. So all the while, in terms of the paratriathlon journey, it was 2014. I saw my ophthalmologist. I hadn't seen her for 5 years. And she said, Katie, what have you been up to? And in that time, since I'd seen her, I'd left Sydney. And I left Sydney because from an accessibility point of view, someone losing their eyesight, it was becoming too hard to navigate, too many people, too much traffic, and I think a lot of us with vision loss and various mobility challenges find that, and hence why I think people with various mobility challenges live in regional areas. So I moved to Newcastle. I started working for the Newcastle Knights and Jets, had a fantastic 2 years there. I did my first Ironman, Port Macquarie. I moved to Darwin and I worked for the NT Department of Sport and Rec in sort of an events marketing role. Came back to Newcastle and was still doing triathlon, but increasingly I was modifying my triathlon. I was doing more wind trainer sessions. I rarely rode with the group. And in fact, my ophthalmologist told me to stop riding at the time, but I pushed it a little bit more. Anyway, she said, so in the 5 years I've seen you've done all this, so you seem to be coping okay. And I said, yeah, I think so. And so she did more tests and it came back that now I was at the legally blind level. And I remember driving in the taxi from that appointment in Parramatta. So this is January 2015. Back to work at Sydney Olympic Park where I was working at the time. And, there was that, I guess, a bit of grief that my eyesight, the reality is it's getting worse and I'm losing my eyesight. And I made 2 phone calls. I rang my sister and, I had a few tears and I said, Bridge, I've just confirmed that I'm now legally blind. And my sister was typical. She's like, tough love. She said, well, you always knew that was going to happen, so just get on with it. I'm like, okay. And then the second phone call I made was to Triathlon Australia because I was thinking I love doing Ironmans and triathlons. How am I going to continue doing what I love doing, despite losing my eyesight? And I had in my mind, I'd love to do Hawaii Ironman, because since then I'd been to Norway. I did the Midnight Sun Marathon where you can do that at midnight, but it's still broad daylight. And I thought, where can someone like me who has no night vision run at midnight? So I went to Norway to do that. So I was always looking for something. And I thought, maybe I can take advantage of my vision loss. And they have 5 spots for what they call physically challenged in Hawaii at the Hawaii Ironman. I thought maybe I can sort of take advantage of my vision loss and get one of those spots because I've never been that good to qualify. So I rang Triathlon Australia and she said, Katie, did you know about Paratriathlon? It's debuting in Rio in 18 months' time. We can get you with the guide. And here I am thinking, wow, yeah, sure, fantastic. So it literally went from January 2015 to doing my first race with a guide on a tandem in March at Sunshine Coast. I won that race. Triathlon Australia sent me to Yokohama in May and I teamed up with the great Michaela Jones. She's won the silver medal at Sydney Olympics 2 times. She's done it all. The first Australian woman to win the Hawaii Ironman. It was an incredible partnership. So we got teamed up. Yokohama won that race. Then they sent me to Italy, Iseo. Apparently George Clooney's just down the road. I'm thinking, how good is this? Managed to win that race. And then by winning that race, I qualified for the World Championships in Chicago, September 2015. So from January to 9 months later, that's how quickly things change. And there I was in Chicago thinking, how this is amazing. Being funded by Triathlon Australia. I'm training at the AIS in Canberra. I've got this great guide, Michaela Jones. Here I am lining up for my first World Champs. Despite having Achilles issues and so on, somehow I managed to win that race. So that was a very amazing, special moment. By winning that race, I qualified for Rio the next year. I automatically qualified a spot. So the Paralympics were on. It was just incredible. This is where, I guess, the irony of it, that I'm losing my eyesight, but I'm just gaining all these amazing opportunities. And that's how I've always seen it. So fast forward September 2016, Rio. What a day that was. Copacabana Beach, beautiful blue sky day. My race was the last race of the 6 that they had over the 2 days, so the Saturday, Sunday. It was at about 11:30. I had 14 friends and family, including my 4 brothers and sisters, and my mum and dad were there. And then you can see Jesus the Redeemer up there. And it was just, for me, it was all about being in the moment and embracing all of that. And obviously there was a lot of pressure and lots of things are happening in the background. And, you know, for me, I've learnt so much about the pressure and the stress and the preparation that goes on in high performance sport. So there I was, Rio, Copacabana Beach. I was 5th out of the water, had a terrible swim. I'm not a great swimmer. Got on the bike, rode well, and I was 3rd off the bike. Got onto the run, which was my favourite leg. And then I was leading the run and managed to win first. And that was just incredible. So that was the Rio Paralympics. So fast forward now, I guess my focus now is Tokyo 2020, and the immediate focus is the World Championships on the Gold Coast. And my other big passion is Sport Access Foundation. So we launched this last year and we provide grants for kids with disability to play sports. So that's something I'm really proud of. But I think that's about sums it up. Bit about my background, and just lovely to share that with you. And I congratulate all of you for all the fantastic work that you've done. So thank you so much.